The story begins just after 3 p.m. on August 28, 2017, when a car pulled into the driveway of a home on Dwight Avenue, Corning. Corning is a historic town about 250 miles upstate of New York City. The house was that of 46-year-old Michele Neurauter, an English professor, and her 14-year-old daughter. Michele had arranged for a local friend to take her teenage daughter to swim practice that day. When the friend arrived, however, neither Michele nor her daughter were answering the door. The house was dark and eerily quiet. Her friend knocked again before peering through the door's glass panel. Something in the hall caught his eye. It was the shadowy silhouette of a woman who seemed to be standing on the stairs a short distance from the door. The friend called out, then looked through the glass again. Only this time, he realized with horror that the woman he'd seen standing on the stairs wasn't standing at all, but hanging. Corning police arrived at the house that day to discover the lifeless body of Michele Neurauter at the bottom of her stairs, suspended from a banister by a rope around her neck. It appeared that she had died from suicide. No one was in the house, and no note was found. Within the hour, Michele's ex-husband, 47-year-old Lloyd Neurauter, was on the phone to police. He was on his way back from California, where he had gone for a job interview. Lloyd told police that Michele's suicide was hardly a surprise. She'd often talked about killing herself and had once even made a suicide pact with friends. She suffered from emotional problems, he said. One time, while in a rage, she'd tried to run his daughter Carrie over as she backed out of the driveway. None of this was news to police. Screaming arguments were commonplace at the Neurauter address. Over a dozen 911 calls had been made from the home in just the last 2 years. Now, it seemed, conflict and disharmony had escalated to the point where Michele had taken her own life. Or had she?
Hey, Nick and Renata, we're here in Corning at the home of Michele Neurauter, who was found dead here in August. What was originally suspected as a suicide has now turned into a homicide investigation. On August 28th, Neurauter's body was discovered at her Dwight Avenue home in Corning.
Been involved in some large cases before, but never in my career have I ever been in a larger investigation encompassing so many different agencies.
Chief Spaulding requested the state police assistance in this case. There were a few things at the scene that were a little suspicious, making us believe this was not a suicide. This was almost a 6-month investigation to bring this case together to the final conclusion.
Chief Jeff Spaulding was one of the first officers to arrive on the scene. Several things struck him as odd. Michele, he knew, was a devoted mother, despite the ongoing conflict in her family. Hanging was an unusual way for a woman to end her life. Would she have wanted to risk her daughters finding her like this? There were other things too. In Michele's bedroom, her mattress had been pushed away from the bed frame. Smudges of blood were on the wall. Clearly, there had been a struggle of some sort. Most unsettling of all, Michele had ligature marks around her lower lip, as though someone had been pulling the rope from behind that had caught on her chin. And then there were the scratches around the neck. It looked like Michele had been clawing at the noose in her final moments of life. While police were still processing the scene, Michele's distraught daughter, Carrie, rang the station. 19-year-old Carrie was Michele's middle child. She'd only recently moved into her new digs at the Rochester Institute of Technology and had just received a call from a family friend telling her that her mother was dead. Police couldn't help but notice the odd switch in Carrie's manner when she asked about her sister. She'd gone from from sobbing and unable to speak to completely matter-of-fact in less than a nanosecond. Carrie told police she had been at her mother's house the night she died. She and her mother had argued. Carrie had stormed out of the house and taken her 14-year-old sister with her. Carrie's younger sister corroborated the account. She told police she'd been sleeping downstairs when Carrie had rushed in and dragged her out before driving her back to Rochester. She then added something chilling. Shortly before leaving the house, she heard screams from her mother that sounded like someone was attacking her. Police now considered the possibility that a fight between Carrie and Michele had tipped over into violence and murder, with Carrie staging the death to make it look like a suicide. But what daughter would strangle her own mother? Later, of course, police would find themselves shell-shocked by this.
Hey, so I just got off the phone with officer whatever, the Corning Police Department.
No, I'd like you to not do that if you can avoid it.
But for now, let's rewind to the disturbing childhood that shaped 19-year-old Carrie Neurauter. Michele and Lloyd had met in 1989 while still in high school. The teenagers were so smitten that they tied the knot just months after graduating before heading off to college. Michele earned herself a master's degree in literature, Lloyd a degree in electrical and computer engineering. The newlyweds then settled into a small farmhouse in Corning, where they had 3 daughters. Lloyd worked as a design engineer at Corning Glass, while Michele put her career on hold to homeschool the kids and volunteer in the local community. For a while there, the Neurauters looked like they had it all. 3 lovely children, a mother devoted to their kids, and Lloyd, well, that's where the image of a picture-perfect family fell short. You see, behind the scenes, Lloyd was belittling, abusive, and controlling. As a parent, he was more of a cult leader than a father. He wanted his children's loyalty and adoration, and they idolized him, especially Carrie. In fact, Lloyd's ego was his life force, and it needed constant feeding. Every Saturday, Lloyd drove his daughters to the local ballet academy. He was the only father there, and he milked it at every opportunity. Each week, he made a point of doing his daughter's hair after they had arrived at the academy, creating elaborate buns specifically to attract the admiring gazes of the mothers there. His daughters lived in fear and awe of him. When angered, he ordered them to drop to their knees and face the wall in a line. Or he slapped them in the face. He took delight in turning them against their mother. Every problem in the family could be traced back to Michele. Everything she did was more evidence of what a useless mother she really was. In fact, the only person he didn't seem to want in his cult was Michele, who was the recipient of constant verbal, emotional, and physical abuse. Around Thanksgiving of 2007, Michele suddenly stopped speaking to her parents. There had been no argument. Michele's mom later said that she knew without asking that Lloyd must have threatened Michele or the children unless she went along with him. Then came 2008 and the financial crisis. Lloyd was laid off. Unable to find work, he took a job out of state in New Jersey. Michele took her chance and filed for divorce. She sold the farm. Her eldest daughter went to live with Lloyd. Her 2 youngest stayed with her in Corning. It might have been the start of a happy new chapter, but the relationship between Michele and her daughter Carrie was fractured beyond repair, and Lloyd launched a campaign to get full custody of the children. By 2017, he had made 26 legal and false filings against Michele. He finally lost that battle in August when he didn't show up in court. Sole custody of their youngest daughter went to Michele. Michele celebrated by taking her daughter and friends out for a day, videoing them laughing and sliding down grassy hills on blocks of ice. Those friends now tried in vain to make sense of her death, because there was something else now that they remembered. Michele had recently asked her friends to promise to look out for her daughters if anything happened to her. They'd agreed, but hadn't thought too much more about it. Now those words seemed horribly prophetic. Had she been living in fear of Lloyd? Police, meanwhile, had been doing their own digging into Lloyd and his dealings. Lloyd Neurauter was in abysmal shape financially, with over $100,000 in credit card debt. In the days following Michelle's death, he tried to collect Michelle's $250,000 life insurance policy right under their nose. The following Wednesday, he had gone to the Steuben County Family Court to terminate his child support payments. Police met Lloyd on his way out of the courthouse and asked him down to the station for a preliminary interview. Lloyd had originally told police that he'd been at a job interview in California when Michelle had died. Police had since learned that Lloyd had flown out to California on that Sunday morning and had returned the same day. That left the whole night of Michelle's death alibi-free. Lloyd now admitted that he spent Saturday helping his daughter Carrie move into her new accommodation in Rochester, a mere 90 minutes from Corning. Carrie had stopped by his hotel room the night before going to Michelle's, and he walked her to her car before returning to his room. The following morning, the two had eaten breakfast together. Lloyd's cell phone records confirmed that his phone had never left Rochester, but surveillance footage told a different story. At about 10 p.m. on that Saturday, CCTV showed both Lloyd and Carrie leaving Rochester in Carrie's car. Lloyd didn't show up again in Rochester until the following morning, when he could be seen walking across the parking lot at 6:30 a.m., wearing the same clothes as the night before. Police decided to smoke Lloyd out and wiretapped Lloyd's and Carrie's phones. They then applied some heat to Carrie by asking her to the station for some additional questioning. As soon as she got off the phone to police, Carrie rang Lloyd.
Hi, sweetie.
Hey, can I have phone with officer whatever reporting police department? He called. He's like, oh, you know, I just like meeting people face to face as well.
You know, I'd like you to not do that if you can avoid it. No one likes talking like that. I got a counseling appointment back in New Jersey tonight. I got to get to my counseling appointment. Tell them this has been really hard on them.
Yeah.
Cry.
Like,
Cry and I have to go. God, you know, and it was just over.
you agreed.
Well, that's really all I got to discuss right now.
Police were now convinced that Lloyd had masterminded and executed the murder of Michelle. Carrie, being the loyal and twisted daughter that she was, had helped her father out by taking him to her mother's house and covering for him. Police decided to interview both Lloyd and Carrie before they had a chance to get their stories straight. Even with the mountain of damning evidence against him, Lloyd held firm, denying any involvement in Michelle's death. He then confidently agreed to return for a polygraph and never came back. Carrie, on the other hand, caved immediately. 1 week before the murder, she said, her father had told her that he couldn't afford to pay her mother anymore and was all out of options. He was going to kill himself. Unless, of course, he took a different option, the very last one available to him, which was to kill her mother and make it look like a suicide.
He was saying like that he was gonna kill himself, but he brought up that there was this other option kind of thing where he wanted to kill her mom.
All his problems would be solved by her death, he said. Plus, he'd get $250,000 of life insurance. Lloyd then laid out a plan. He would put a towel in Michelle's mouth to stifle any screams, strangle her with a rope, and then throw her over the banister. Carrie's role would be to stay downstairs and watch her younger sister, who often slept on the living room sofa. Carrie had agreed. She picked her father up that night and took him to her mother's house, where she disarmed Michelle's security system and went downstairs to watch her younger sister. Lloyd, meanwhile, crept upstairs. Carrie heard screaming and Michelle yelling, "Why are you here? What are you doing?" And then, "Why?" before everything suddenly went quiet. But things hadn't quite gone to plan. The noise had woken up Carrie's little sister. Carrie took her out of the house as quickly as she could and put her in the car. When Lloyd finished killing Michele, he then climbed into the open hatch of Carrie's car without the 14-year-old seeing. Police were ready to arrest Lloyd and traced his phone to a 5-story parking garage in Princeton, where they found him sat on the roof of the garage, threatening to jump. For 90 minutes, they tried to talk him down before a state trooper, who happened to be a former football player, tackled him to the ground. Lloyd and Carrie were both arrested for the murder of Michele Neurauter. Both pled not guilty. After 2 weeks sitting in jail, however, Carrie agreed to testify against her father in exchange for a lesser charge of second-degree murder. She then revealed to police another horrifying new detail. She admitted to going upstairs after her father had killed her mother and helping Lloyd drag her mother's body over to the stairs before hoisting it up and over the banister. Faced with Carrie's testimony and new evidence that his DNA was all over Michele's clothing, Lloyd changed his plea to guilty in an attempt to avoid the death sentence. He told the court he had coerced his daughter Carrie to help him plan and carry out the murder by threatening to kill himself if Michele was not murdered. On December 4th, 2018, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But Lloyd's trial and confession had changed things again for Carrie. So had the boxes that Michele had accumulated of court papers, journals, and screenshots of texts between her and Lloyd documenting years of abuse and that of her daughters. The court agreed that Carrie was, in fact, a victim of enduring and extreme manipulation and brainwashing from a young age and reduced the charge to second-degree manslaughter. Carrie was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in prison and was paroled on January 16, 2020. During her trial, Michele's mother, Jenny Loudy, spoke up for Carrie. In a letter to the judge, she wrote, "I do not believe my daughter Michele would have wanted a long prison sentence for her daughter. She would want her to eventually lead a happy life. After everything she's been through and done, that might take a lot of therapy."